No. Why, Curt Doolittle.
Where's your coffee, Dr. Brad?
Right here.
Okay.
You get the right cup.
I gotta make sure you have fuel for the journey.
Mm-hmm. I'm charged up, ready
Uh,
to begin.
I'm late. It's almost quarter after because again I woke up at quarter
All
of
right.
and I tried to get my dishes done
Attaboy.
before we started, and it still looks like I had family dinner over here last night because I got so many dishes to stick back in the dishwasher. But so I have one humorous thing, and then I guess we're going to talk about unless you have anything to bring up today.
No, I'm good. I don't have any. It's a remarkably quiescent period we're
Yeah, it's
enjoying.
like what's going on in the world? Everybody in the world who's troublemakers, drunk with New Year's celebration hangover or something,
They're just getting over it, I guess.
or they're having so much the usual family crisis created by the holidays,
Mm,
confrontation with one another. They're distracted with more mundane local present issues. But anyway, I want to talk about a piece of humor on Twitter, and I want to talk about your concern about Russia, and these will take just 2 minutes,
mm.
and then for the audience, we're probably going to work on what today will mostly be a working session, so I'll label it as such instead of a chat because we're trying to we're now able to get the book done, so I kind of want to get it done.
Good.
Or the book's done. Ouch. Do you ever bang your knee?
Don't like it.
No,
Don't like hitting the knee.
I bought a chair that I really like, specifically because I like to sit cross-legged.
Okay.
Um, Probably from my childhood of sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of the television and having my father yell at me to get out of the way, and my sisters. Not going to provoke any response from you. I thought it would maybe give you opportunity to interject
Right.
something witty. I have to try
Yeah.
to feed you opportunities, right?
And you're very kind.
Yeah. Anyway, so anyway, all right, getting gear. Okay, so humor. So there's the Twitter has this thing on the side that's like popular shit people are talking about, popular hashtags. And so I did like a 20 word, 255 character analysis of Prince Harry, who's
Right.
really a mommy's boy, hiding behind a hooker's skirt, so to speak,
Oh my.
because she's a hooker, and hookers are used to dealing with the public and presenting face and lying and prevaricating. He's found a hooker's skirts to hide behind so he can have mommy's protection again, and all this is doing, of course, is preventing him from getting the therapy he needs to grow up into a man that isn't undermining the monarchy and is actually having a healthy marriage relationship and producing useful offspring instead of being a cancer on the institution and the country. So anyway, I just wrote a little thing like that. Holy shit, like 100,000 engagements as of this morning.
Really?
That never
Really?
happens.
Wow.
And so I tried to figure out if I could feed it, which I could, right? Which was just responding a lot, right? Responding and trying to be witty. And it's just so frustrating that I could write like the same morning. I wrote 3 pieces which were profound, deep, and
Yeah.
insightful shades. And I'll get, the usual. I usually get 400 or 500 engagements, and sometimes I'll get 800, and occasionally I get 1,000, but not many. And and I usually I get very few comments. Like, it's common for me to get, half a dozen, or I mean, very rarely. So it's just funny that it's just such an essay on reality that I can give a psychological diagnosis
Right?
on a celebrity and it like floods my inbox with, and I don't know how many, I'm getting like 40 followers an hour. It's like,
Really?
it was ridiculous. And I had to warn them. I'm like, just so you know, I mean, I talk about really controversial stuff, and a lot of you are gonna leave. Right?
Well, maybe you don't know. It's like its exposure is not bad. It's like what's interesting is that people find that to be interesting.
What I thought was the other thing I thought was most interesting about it is the quality of the morality of people versus the quality of morality of people who usually object to me. And that was much better. This was fairly interesting. And so I found that really interesting. So what is it about that subject that has better adjusted, more moral people, even if they disagree, versus these, I view them as largely mentally ill people, right? That are at the fringes, which I thought was really interesting. The second thing is that the British audience is so much less dumb than the American. It's amazing.
Why do you say that?
Because the Brits have a moralism. They have hyper moralism like we do. It's actually a virtue signal like the Canadians. And worse, they have the class structure, unlike the Canadians. But they're at least adulted. Does that make sense? Right? They have these failings, but their comments, if you sort of look at what's the implied, they're largely adulted. So what's interesting is that by maintaining the class structure, you have a way of complaining while being an adult. And we have no class structure, and we have no way of complaining while being an adult. So all our complaints are infantile, right?
Oh.
And it's just, you know what I mean? It's kind of that was I just was like, what's the pattern I'm seeing here? There's a pattern. Oh no, it can't be that, because a class structure gives you something concrete to complain about that's actually real. It's just fascinating. And so, on their side, they have, like they have the woke problem, probably as bad or worse than we do.
Yeah.
They have, because of their hyper morality, they have the immigration problem worse than we do, but not as numerous as ours, but it's just as bad. They have the loss of key cities problem like we do, to degeneracy. Like we do. I mean, London, which used to be paradise, is sort of like San Francisco used to be paradise, now it's a shithole. So they have all these things going on. On the other hand, they're still better educated. And they're not as educated as the Germans. Germans are better educated, but they're still better educated than Americans. And so they're better able to articulate what they're thinking and saying. I noticed that being there. I also noticed that the manners thing was still persisting. And I wonder, anyway. So I just find it interesting is that the Jewish introgression in the post-war period undermined our institutions, right, of culture. Whereas in England, they're undermining the academy and the population and the rule of law through immigration. but they haven't been as successful as undermining morality. I mean, I always find British women really whorish. I don't know why. I mean, even worse than American women. But it's only in appearance, right? It's not actually true in practice. It's not I mean, it's like comparing, matters of degree, but it was fairly interesting. So it's just turned out to be a really interesting, quite accidental science research experiment, right? So that was my first
Oh my.
observation, and it's just like I don't know. It put me in a very good mood. First of all, because I'm angry arguing with wrong people, not evil people. Does that make
Okay.
sense? And in America, I feel like I'm arguing with wrong and evil people,
Yeah.
and that was very disheartening. But it was heartening to finally argue with wrong but morally
Simply wrong people.
simply wrong people. And I find that quite enjoyable because it's a and the other thing is that they understand my wit because I basically have the same kind of sense of humor, which is verbal, right? It's
Right.
verbal articulation. So I got to employ that. Um, so it was just, but I ended up saying, oh, Christ, this guy, I hate. It's like these things I discover that that are part of the American thing that I want to be like right about and that they're good and whatever. And it turns out that we're wrong, they're right. And it's just the class structure is better. It just pisses me off.
Oh my. Yeah. I understand that one. I understand that one.
So anyway, it was an interesting experiment, and I have an address in London that I could use, which is right downtown. So I'm like, I might change my experiment with changing my Twitter address so that I back to London, because I used to be in Kiev,
Oh,
which gets you really weird Twitter, by the way. It's fascinating. And then switching back to London and from the UK, back to the UK, so that I get that context and run with it a while to see what else I can sort of
huh.
pattern recognize out of that mess. Um,
Interesting.
this falls into what we're saying here is that most of what we do is not in philosophy. Philosophy evolved as somewhat like theology out of textual interpretation, or the meaning of words, not what people mean. The
Wait,
difference.
whoa. Try that again.
uh, Philosophy and theology share a sort of oddness, which is that it's the analysis of what words mean rather than what people mean.
What people think they mean?
Well, people mean something when they write stuff down, but there's always, because it's always an abbreviation, right? I mean,
That's right. It's a codification of
codification. The difference between what people mean to write down and what they write down is dependent upon
yes.
the difference in context between the author and the reader. Well,
Yes.
so in philosophy, it's a more rigorous version of the same thing, whereas philosophy just denies the supernatural, right? It doesn't deny the sophistry, unfortunately, but it denies the supernatural. And science denies anything but testimonial, right? Reportable.
Right.
And so the problem here is, what do fucking people mean? And so when you do what we do, what you learn to do is disambiguate the sentence, right? And I don't know, we subconsciously we realize what words have what meanings. We disambiguate the sentence. Subconsciously, you operationalize it. When you do that, you figure out what's missing.
Right.
Then once you know what's missing, you say, okay, what theft are they trying to perform? A, and which method of lying are they using? Or
Right.
methods of lying, because it's usually like 6 or 8 of them, right?
That's
And,
right.
and so people don't realize that's what we're doing. That's how methodical what we're doing is, right? I mean, I recognize because I invented it, so I've gotten good at it, but they don't. So you realize this, and so what you're really getting at is what people mean, not what you
Right.
think, right? You're getting at what people mean, right? And not what so much what they say, right? So to speak, and not what the words mean, and not what the words mean in some other context, but what the
Right.
people mean in their given context, which is acquisition.
Yeah. What are they trying for?
What are they trying to get? What they're trying to get
Oh
or not.
boy. That's interesting. So you're able to discern what they are actually doing with that verbalization,
Right.
but it's mostly what's not there,
It's mostly what's not there. Exactly.
or in an ambiguous fashion there.
Right. Right. And
Oh,
so it's
that's
like
awful.
no, but it's like trying to explain. It's helping me explain what we do and why it works.
Mhm.
Right. That's because the lie is the tell.
Yes.
Right. The lie is the tell. So if you can identify the the property in toto, the demonstrated interest, right? And you can and if you can identify the lie, it's just like, okay, we know what you mean.
Oh yeah.
And so when people are arguing with me, I'm like, different cultures lie differently
Okay.
because collectively they steal, lie, cheat, and steal, differently from how individuals lie, cheat, and steal. So when people say you can't diagnose, I mean, it's like the whole origin of psychology, IQ statements, personality testing, whatever it is we do,
Right.
is uh, is using a lot of questions to detect minor variation, consistencies and minor variations.
Right.
And so I'm like, what we're doing is via negativa linguistic analysis.
All right. Let's clarify that a little bit.
We're looking for what you're not saying in order to lie, in order to get something
Yeah.
within the context of your culture's method of lying, metaphysics that presumes what's good, right?
Wow.
It's just like, so it's just funny because the people might think it's idiot. We're doing some kind of idiot. It's just incredibly. I mean, really, it's just pretty sophisticated uh, reversal of the history of justification, right? I mean,
Whoa. Reversal of the history of justification.
we've evolved justificationary argument, not falsificationary argument, partly because justificationary is cheap. The falsificationary is expensive, right? It requires
Right.
a market to falsify. But once you have markets, you accumulate evidence, and those markets falsify any no matter what justification you make. This is why we know that you can't justify anything; you can only make it survive criticism, right? Which was
Right.
Popper's a Jewish contribution to Western logic, which he completely didn't understand at all. It's just somewhat funny, but yeah, Jewish thought is pilpul and sophistry and critique, right? Pilpul and critique,
Right.
and so he didn't realize he was combining Anglo-analytic thought, Germanic thought, and Jewish critique into it just subconsciously trying to solve the problem of what is this thing called science. He never quite got to its testimony, and he never quite got to its markets, but he really understood the problem. And he saw, so he thought through his Jewish cultural lens. But so we've sort of got to this point where we've like, okay, now we've basically composed the algorithm for identifying what a person means versus, which is the via negativa, which is important. That's the observation you brought earlier, which is what's unstead, right? Versus what's said or what's written, because right. So we have what they mean versus what they said it was written. Well, this mirrors, of course, science, philosophy, and theology, the escalation from what is, from the individual's actual intentions to what he's saying, to what in the cultural context they're claiming. And this is a pretty profound sequence I'm discussing here. I think you probably grasp it, but I just found it really, it's getting easy for me to, like, I used to have to explain what we're doing by explaining the method and why it worked. And this allows me to put it in a more general context and tell the story without delving into the methodology.
Right. Yeah, there's the interesting function of it is this is like the thing that is not said is goes to the projection of a presumption.
I need you to.
So it goes like this.
I'm
gonna make an ambiguous statement.
Yes.
And I'm going to presume you're going to fill in the gaps with your own imagination based on your cultural background or whatever like that, the context of the situation that is advantageous to me.
Right. It's called suggestion.
There you go.
And it's seduction using seduction using suggestion into a deceit, usually a false promise, right? A fraud. Okay. What do women do whenever they're talking to you and implying that you might get some pussy? Sorry, I had to go there. I had to. I couldn't just let it go by. Just came to me. It's like laying right there. Say it. Go ahead. Say it. I'm trying to provoke you and it's not working. You're like, I can see it behind your eyes. You wanted to say something and now you won't.
I'd say, this is episode 230105. It is. How about that? We have like and subscribe and notification buttons. It's awesome. Leave us some comments too, because this is just silly talk. It's fun.
Oh,
we're doing all right.
Yeah, but have you noticed how often we talk about a serious subject and then they comment on the silly talk afterwards?
Yeah, they do. That's okay too.
It's cute.
Don't forget to check out the donation page at the Institute website, please.
Anyway, so that's that. Speaking of which, it's made it a little easier to talk about. But if you thought about it as math, what we're doing is relatively obvious. It's all math is doing the same thing. Right? How do you construct something that leaves open that exposes the space around what we're saying? But anyway, as a painter, one of the things they teach you in painting is most of us paint the subject. One of the things they teach you in painting is to paint the background first.
Right.
The negative spaces. And to leave them relatively fuzzy. And then you work in detail on the subject matter. And then you only really put a lot of detail in the eyes, nose, and mouth. Sometimes the hands. Whatever you want to draw attention to. And it's sort of works how our eyes work, right? Where there's a narrow place in our vision where it's high resolution and the rest of it's lower until out here. That's right. Black and white. So that
Yeah,
was
that's an analog for what we're talking about with this verbalizations.
yes. So second thing. Okay. So I'm not gonna tell you you're right.
Okay, thank you.
Because I don't think you're gonna be right, but I'm trying.
Oh,
Well, oh no.
that sounded like a gauntlet falling to the ground.
Well, I'm just baiting you trouble. Right? I'm making a little trouble because that's what the fun comes from is when people agree on a lot, you have to create reasons for
That's right.
imitation discord in order to have some play or the game to play, right? So so we have had an interesting progress in this war from thinking Russia. I mean, I knew they were going to invade, but I had no idea they're going to perform this badly. I knew the Ukrainians would fight this hard. I mean, I knew that. That's because I know them, right?
Right,
They're even fighting harder than I thought. And I understood that what Russian tactics were. It's artillery and bodies. They just basically throw things. They're basically throw things at you, and they throw bodies at you to absorb your bullets, make you run out of it. Right? That's what the Russians.
right.
It's actually volume over quality, quantity over quality. But I didn't expect them to perform. I mean, because Americans, like we think of the world very differently, which is one of the reasons people don't understand this. We think in logistics.
Hmm.
Like there's a bunch of guys in the front line, and we actually think about them, bunch of guys. Everything else is logistics, right? How to get those guys the shit they need.
Right,
So we think about like moving lots of shit around the world really fast to keep the guys armed, right? Those guys armed. And we have a really low tolerance for losses. And the Russians have a really high tolerance because the Ukrainians think they've lost 30K and the Russians 100K. So it's a pretty good kill ratio still. Oh no, that doesn't include civilians because they think they've lost almost 300K civilians. So this isn't coming from Ukraine. This comes from U.S. intel. So the point here is that we're not providing Russia with an exit strategy that doesn't get Putin killed, right? And or the rest of the Siloviki killed, or the now very small group of 100 at the top doesn't get them killed. Now, so we're kind of backing them into the corner because they're as afraid of being killed by their own as they are. They're more afraid of that than stopping the war, than continuing the war and escalating the war.
okay.
So I'm saying my understanding of Russians is based on my understanding of Putin and the people and the Russian people. It's not based on the sycophants around him, right? Right. Those people are really fucked up. He's actually not. He's just you made a mistake, but he's not fucked up. So the problem is that risk of escalation you've been worried about is actually possible, whereas in the past it wasn't possible. So we'll see. So that's my way of telling you might have some right coming down the path.
I know.
So here's what General, what's his name? Fucking the guy who used to be the general, the shit that did this stuff. He said, "Look, we've told Putin, we know where you are, all the time, every day. We know where all these guys are, all the time, every day. anything happens, we're not going to destroy Russia. We're going to kill all you. Which is just so that doesn't mean if something happens to Putin that people won't do stupid shit, right? Because he's the thing that creates the order. So I'm trying to bait shit out of you here. It's not fucking work. I can't get shit out of you this morning. Did you not get enough sleep? Did you do your work with the people this morning? Did you not have your Wheaties? I mean, I can't provoke
I did.
anything out of you.
I worked and I saw 21 people or something like that. I'm doing my job. Let's see. It says exactly how many I saw. I will report. 21.
So I'm trying to get you to do your
My job.
your to be the antagonist here. I'm being the
It's
protagonist.
like the way I see it is I don't trust any of the information coming out of that theater. And I regard the United States as a partisan, so they're not going to say the straight stuff anyway, because they're trying to propagandize the American people to get their way, as they have been doing for probably 25 years or more. And it's just like the depths of depravity to which our government has been spent is just
I don't believe that there's not a lot of evidence. Our military came out of Vietnam very reformed about what to do with the American people.
very what?
Very reformed about how they needed to speak to the American people, and they've been consistent. Now, what you've seen is politics invade the operations of the military.
Yeah.
But you don't see too much of that coming out of the military. Matter of fact, you'll see the best assessments. The problem is that because we have a lot of senior ex-military people who've grown up in different theaters, handling different problems, their opinions vary, just like anyone's opinions vary. But what's consistent across them is they all think they're telling the truth.
Okay.
Right? Now, and so if it's like the analysts who are people, I read, they're not trustworthy. If they're talking about predictions, they're usually only trustworthy if they're talking about, what forces, what confirmable facts. But when you talk to the actual soldiers, right, and I'm talking about field commanders, right? People who
Right.
the Schwarzkopfs and those guys got to. And you're gonna get pretty straight stuff. And the ones you have to read into a little bit are the guys who've been in the NATO side.
NATO.
The NATO, because they're trying to speak in a European friendly manner, despite the fact that Europeans don't carry their weight.
I was reading about this, the Colonel, I believe, and he was talking about the fact that he said NATO was a defensive organization and it became offensive in the 90s under Clinton. I'm like, that's interesting.
It's partly true. It's offensive to whom? See,
well,
we viewed it as a moral obligation to defend those countries from the ongoing threat of Russia. But the only reason there was an ongoing threat of Russia, to didn't fucking integrate them into NATO when they asked.
Yeah.
It was fucking stupid. And so I view it as this is our next chance. This is our choice.
Right. We're in agreement here.
So
the question is just how do we get there from here? Correct. And it's like the globalist types are putting roadblocks in there on purpose, in my opinion.
So the question is and the problem is nobody's saying that. What that's the actual answer that everybody needs to hear.
What is?
That we're going to do a reciprocal. We're going to it needs to be more than reciprocal defense. It needs to be we're going to integrate you into NATO, right, over the next whatever years, and we're going to mutually assure each other's borders. That's what the
Yeah.
Russians need. That's what's driving their behavior. Their demographic collapse and relate and their attempt to divert all capital to the military to be able to defend those borders, except the diversion of the capital to the military is ending up in private pockets. And so the problem is Russians have a real problem. They're surrounded by hostiles, and hostiles who will willingly take the territory and resources. So, and that's because if you look at Russia, it's 11 time zones, but the green shit is a very narrow band. Like if you look at the Canadian border, right? Like 70% of people of Canadians live below the whatever that
49th
parallel.
I was just watching this video yesterday.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's just like this is what I love these videos is men watch these things and they actually learn. But why weren't we taught this shit? Because it was like, why do you have to learn it on video when it's fucking obvious? Right? In other words, it's actually
somebody has to tell you.
Yeah, but why has it become important to know this? Right? Why was it important to not know this in the past? That's the interesting thing. So Canadians live in this very thin strip, like walking distance, basically, from the American.
Right to the
There's
border.
nobody up there. Well, Siberia's like that too.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's like if you get out of especially the minute
off the railroad.
What?
Off the railroad.
Right, and the reason, of course, is fucking awful. And the other problem is you can feed all of Russia from Ukraine, but Russia can't feed itself from that strip.
I know.
Or can barely feed. It can't produce surpluses from that strip.
Right.
I said that wrong. It can't produce enough income from surpluses from that strip. Because of the productivity of the land. So they have a lot of land, but it's actually low productivity. That's what I was trying to say.
Right.
Like, what did I say? I just said something wrong. How did I? Okay. The productivity
surpluses
of land is too low for the infrastructure necessary to maintain it. So the difference is Canada is next to us, so they get to virtue signal like a bunch of pussies. And Russia's surrounded by people who want to take the territory. And so we have to, the trick for Russia is like, okay, great. Their problem is woke is actually really bad and they know it. Liberalism is bad. And so it has to be part of the agreement. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And democracy is only okay if you have a cultural majority. It's like Russia's not going to let what's happening to America happen to Russia. And they're right not to. They're not allowing immigration from Islam or from Africa.
Yeah.
And so we have to so any reconciliation has to include reciprocal defense, but acknowledgement of this, either the right of the Russians to do that or the superiority of the Russians to do that. Now, of course, what we would like, our Western people would like, is to fully integrate Russians, right? To rescue their economy because they're fellow warriors and Christians, right? To get their government to be less corrupt, even if it has the same policies, right?
Yeah. Okay.
And why? Because we can then use them as a force against the Marxist woke chain here in the West, because they've already been through it. They don't want it again. They've already been through it. They don't want any more of this shit.
It's a funny thing because it's like this. We're in the throes of it right now. It has to get worse here because that's what it takes to wake up.
Yep.
Sorry. It's awful. I'm gonna be okay. It's I'm champing at the bit, I think they say.
For what? for it to get better.
You throw the yoke off.
Yeah. All right.
It's like, it's just so god awful, this mess we're living through.
I'm
Okay.
gonna, because I got up without doing I'm gonna get up.
Yeah.
Pause.
You're gonna pause it.
Use some antihistamine, make a fresh cup of coffee and get a
Mm.
bagel, and I'll be back. All right.
Okay.
All right. Is that all right?
It is.
Okay.
Because I am out of coffee myself.
Okay. So I'll be back in 5 minutes or something.
Well, welcome back. Curt was just, we are talking about this comment that was made by one of the fellows in the Signal chat, which I will read a little bit of. I remember when I first encountered your work that I found some of the confidence with which you made statements off-putting for the same reason. And it goes like this. Curt was just saying that I know it sounds a lot like I'm an arrogant asshole. That's just an illusion. However,
it's not quite an illusion. It's just the difference. It's this the difference between it's like the difference between arrogance and truth is a matter of whether you're right or not. And I'm
right.
like, I sound
it's not arrogant to say the truth.
It's just true.
There's no arrogation.
And I'm like, I don't, and it's like, if I like, yeah, I'm pretty clear when you can see when I comment on people is like, if I say, well, I don't really know enough to comment on this, or I don't have enough facts to comment on. I mean, you've seen me do this, right? I mean,
yes.
Or I don't have enough to be sure, but my opinion might be, or we could look for. But if I say it is, that's because it fucking is. Period. End of goddamn story. Why? Because I wrote a proof for it. Right. And right. It's not my opinion anymore. I don't get a choice. It's a system of measurement. And that's because, as we were talking a few minutes ago, in history, you have order, chaos at first. Then your organized religion comes along and they invent good and evil. Because essentially chaos, disorder, is evil is badness, right? But then the organized religion comes on, they put order, or they turn order, chaos into good and evil. Well, the problem with our work is that, just like we were mentioning philosophy earlier in the discussion, is that now it's a system of measurement from which you can make an absolute judgment about deviation from reciprocity. There's no question. And we can make an absolute judgment about proof of construction, that what you're saying is possible, right? Is testifiable,
right?
And so I'm like, it's just math. It's like math. It's an the difference is mathematics is cardinal, and our work is ordinal, but it's the same fucking thing. I mean, I can't be, if I can write a proof for it, that's just math, right? It's not my opinion anymore. And so the problem is that when we say something, it's not just, well, it's good order or chaos, which you can say, well, that's an opinion, or it's good or evil, which you could say, well, that's your opinion, or you can say it's immoral, it's moral or immoral, which you can say, well, that's relative. But when we say, well, the truth is, it's not relative, it's not an opinion, it's just fact. And it's as factual as any other measurement in the sciences. And so that's what people don't like about the certainty with which I'll make an assertion, is it sounds like I'm rendering a moral or immoral, good or bad, order or chaos, or sequence.
Yeah, I think it's a rejection of an absolutist framework.
Yes.
But it's like, but the truth is absolute.
The truth is absolute. There is a law. There are laws of the universe. We can define them. We have. We've enumerating them. I'm looking at my screen above us, and there's thousands of pages of it. Right. We've enumerated them. Right. From the first principle of the quantum background all the way up to the evolutionary consequences of group evolutionary strategy.
Right.
These aren't opinions anymore. These are measurements like any other measurement, right? And good and bad are just statements of fact. Either you're engaging in reciprocity or not, which is meaning you're either creating or destroying, right? So destruction isn't a or stealing, it isn't an opinion. So in any event, it just turns into a very interesting sort of discussion. But so I come out as like this arrogant right now. So this is I want to play with this a little bit.
Yes.
But it's like I'm just stating math as far as I know. And Brad knows this, right? You're there, right? You can do the same thing, right? And you look at Martin, he doesn't even put emotion in it anymore.
He does too. He hides it well, though. He's still mad, I think.
But he just views everyone as, he's at the point where you get to, which is natural. It's like, you're well-meaning, but you're stupid and ignorant and stupid. Right? And here's how it is, and don't bother me. Right? I mean, he's just that concrete about it. Because that's where you get to, because it's just math. You don't have a choice. You don't have an opinion. I mean, you tease me all the time because I object to the sacred cows that I want to preserve.
I know.
And you tease me about it's like, I know I'm wrong. It doesn't matter. I still want to love what I love, but it's like, I know it's not good for me, but I'm going to eat it anyway because I like it. Right. So,
I know.
So anyway, these are just measures. Now, on the other hand, Trump, I use the same method Trump does, right? Which is important because it's how powerful people negotiate. Which is, if you are superior and had demonstrated superiority, there's no need to feign equality, right? That's actually deception, right? There's no need to feign equality in order to give people the option to continue believing their falsehoods. So what I do in debates is I make an arrogant, truthful statement on purpose because I know they can't tolerate it, right? Which only baits them into responding, which only means I can respond again with another truth, which only baits them into responding. So in some degree, the arrogance is part of the act of education, which we call King of the Hill game, right? Anyway, so I love Trump for that reason. I don't make judgment. I mean, I only care about two things: his policy and his use of his mirroring of the left's tactics of undermining in order to control the conversation. So the left undermines you in order to get control of the conversation. What Trump did is he undermines the leftists in order to get control of the conversation. And they hate it because it's the mirror. And the feminine mind can't tolerate the mirror. So whereas when you do it to us and conservatives, we think it's funny.
Yes.
Right? We view it as trash talking. Right? We just think it's funny, right? I mean, it's not even a problem. It's just funny, right? But for them, it's horrific because it violates their ability to get people into an emotional state that they can maintain them in by producing power over them.
Right, which is why the left can't meme.
That's why the left can't meme. Yeah.
They can't see the iron. They won't see the irony of their logical inconsistencies.
Well, I mean, that's part of being the feminine mind of the left, right? Is that you can't tolerate self-criticism, right? You can't tolerate anything that would amplify your neuroticism. And so that's what you find out is how many women will ever admit they're wrong? How many leftists? I admit I'm wrong all the fucking time. Usually in front of you in public multiple times and expressing how pissed off I am that you've made me wrong.
They didn't make you wrong. I didn't make you wrong. I did. That's not my job.
The point is, or like when I'm wrong online, I'm like I said something the other day, and I can't remember how I misspoke it. It was one of those things where, oh, you're right. I just, it's, I was thinking about the genetics of the overall skeletal form.
Okay.
right? And so your skeletal form is actually not evenly stored. It's stored as separate pieces. So you
Yeah.
get the ectomorph. Is it ectomorph like you? You get the tall, thin guy on one end. If coincidence is aligned. Me, I got like the barrel chested thing, right? But I got the short thing, and I mean, it's just they didn't work together very well, right? I'm sorry, I'm just trying to be funny. But so they're stored differently. So that's about 50% inheritable overall skeletal form, right? But height is like 70% inheritable. So I was answering this question about height, and I put down it's about 50% inheritable. The guy corrected me, and I was like, "Oh, sorry, it's just I had this in my head and whatever." So, or other things like what I mean, because it's common if you're quoting numbers all the time,
You're going to get the wrong numbers on
you're going to
occasion.
get the wrong number out of you. I remember one guy a long time ago. I was like, "Oh, he spent this much of the budget on this and this," and of course, I had to reverse the numbers. Right? It's not because I didn't understand the subject matter. It's just because, and he's telling me I'm trying to lie. No, I just I just got the numbers backwards because I have a lot of shit in my head. I can't always get it. It
My
doesn't
working
always.
memory was exhausted.
So anyway, so you do this. So I admit I'm wrong all the time, and you'll actually see me. I've done this myself to say is a apologies or sorry, right? Those are the keywords I use when apologizing.
Right.
Apologies, forgive me, or you're right. I tend to use those phrases, and I look through I say it all the time. The thing is, it doesn't require anything more than that,
No.
right? I don't.
It is amazing though that the lefties can't,
They can't.
and they always have to come back and get the last word, in my opinion. Until you exhaust them.
Well, that's what I do, right? That's why they can't understand it. Is that to me, it doesn't take but one neuron to exhaust them. So I'll spend, I'll be working and I'll just I'll see the alert come up. I'll toggle over. I'll repeat the core point, insult them somehow, and continue until they give up, right? Because that's what you have to do. But the problem is nobody wants to have it's not in the conservative mind to have an inefficient argument for the purpose of efficiency. It's not, there's the conservative is always trying to rapidly solve a problem so he can move on. So it's counterintuitive to defeat the
Right. It's too much work.
It's too much work.
Lefties generally will wear you down.
Well, and the reason, of course, is there's no logical consistency. So they don't, right? So they're forcing us to try to impose a logical consistency on basically their smoke, right? There's no logical consistency to it.
Right.
So they do, well, I can't remember what Scott Adams calls it, but they do sequential accusation because they can't defend any argument they make. And so you're left in this position of exhausting. So the way you defeat that is you never take the bait of whatever they're saying. You always repeat the central argument, say that they haven't defeated it, and then say, well, you're lying by this method. And you just keep that up until they give up. And so people tease me, why do you do that? Well, first of all, I'm usually doing something, and it doesn't take them, every 10 minutes to when I'm taking a breath to toggle over and say you're a fucking moron and this is why. Go back. And it's fucking entertaining, right? I'm just entertaining to wear them down, to show that in order to defeat them, you have to defeat them on their terms. You have to exhaust them by making an emotional consistency of insult, calling them names.
Okay, so you're projecting a emotional consistency, the opposite of emotion they prefer.
Right, and and then I repeat the central argument for the audience, right? And so all they're doing is like repeat advertising.
Yes,
is giving me the opportunity to chant every single person in their follow group.
Oh,
right. The underlying principle. And so I find that's how I used to get most of my followers. It's just because it's just repetition.
What happens is that someone gets taken down social status by you, so it's just jousting, and you won, and it's therefore the sensitive souls are gonna, the ones that are the more rational ones will go, get shaken out of their reverie.
No, I don't actually care about this person. What I care about is understanding how their minds work.
Huh.
Right. And understanding why conservatives fail. And it's the same reason I have a problem with the right is they want a quick, easy solution so they can go home, which is how the right thinks, right? I want to do my shit, leave me alone. Right. So the problem is you can't defeat the enemy on your terms. You have to defeat the enemy on their terms. And their terms are continuous undermining. And if
we have to defeat them in such a fashion.
That's why they hated. That's why they took over social media and shut down. Is because it turns out that memeing was more effective than their method of undermining. That's what the whole revolt against the alt-right was what they did was they took the left's tactics of undermining and made it as humor, ridicule, carrying the truth, whereas the left is undermining to suggest the falsehood, right? And so the alt-right was working. That's why they had to attack it in memes, is because it was defeating them. And the right knew this. The alt-right knew this. People knew this. We all knew it. I just didn't consider myself alt-right, but I got lumped in with them. Because literally what happened is intellectual leadership of the alt-right came out of libertarianism, right? And they united with conservatism to produce that, because the libertarians are the intellectual wing. It's like liberals, the intellectual wing of the left, and the libertarians, the intellectual wing of conservatives. It's just same shit. It's just an IQ distribution. So that's why they had to shut down social media, is because the social media was a superior so social media memes were a superior method of taking advantage of the new technology to undermine the left, and the left could no longer make accusations. I mean, I don't know if you remember when the NPC thing came out, but it was fucking glorious. I mean, I wrote that that came out. I was never into the frog, but it fucking worked, right?
It was pretty good.
Right. I mean, I find that's just too much over. But the NPC thing, that was right up my alley, because there actually are not NPCs. They actually aren't. There's no reason involved, right? It's just imitation, emotional. It's emotional. It's emotional synergy, and in the absence of logical or rational thought.
Right.
And they use it through what a normal, good, healthy, mentally minded person would say. They would criticize. They would say, "I object because this is not in my interest." What an unhealthy, dishonest, undermining person does is accuse you of malice. And so that's what the left does. And so to get back to it, so people ask me, well, why do you understand psychology so much? Because I didn't take the positiva therapy route. I looked for why people lie. And by my studying of lies and my study of neurology, basically biology, genetics, I understood the relationship between the method of lying and the method of thinking, genetics, right? The organization of the brain. And that thing told me, well, because behavior is always reducible to acquisition, right, retention and consumption. So it's always reducible to that. There's only one thing driving all human behavior. So there's no point in like trying to study that, right? It's you study the variations from it, which you see as defect, trying to drive everybody to be equal, which is what female psychology does. Or you can see it as what is the field of ways by which people commit deceptions?
Right. How are they lying?
How are they lying? And so at the end of the day, I end up with the via negativa understanding of psychology, which you and I did. Part of what we did together was profound, which was disambiguate the male and female methods of argument into, wait a minute, this whole system over here is the male version of this system. And by looking at the male system, we figured out the female system lying, right? I mean, and the Jews demonstrate it for us every fucking day. So I just did that. See,
I know. I heard it. I heard the arrow go
yeah,
on my head.
you just don't take the bait. You never take the bait.
I know how dull.
I set these things up for my own joy and fulfillment, and you always deprive me.
I know, but it's like I get great joy out of not reaction. Because you react to it. I see you set it all up, and I see you waiting for some action, and it's like this. Then you react, and that's funny to me.
Fuck. Anyway, so it's like, how can you diagnose somebody psychology? Because I can tell by the way you lie. The problem is you have the virtue of social media is people aren't self-reporting in response to a question where they can demonstrate a pretense. What they're doing is actually responding with under a moral outrage, and so you get the truth. So you get the truth,
Right.
the truth of the way they lie. And so, if you want insight into the mind of human beings, because we all acquire different things, it's how
this is like I'm backing up 2 steps here because it's like it's just a stunning function. I have to repeat this: you cannot defeat the left on your terms.
correct.
Okay, so it's like this. So it's just fascinating. So it's like this: you're being emotionally consistent, which is insulting to the leftist, which is denigrating them as a human being,
Mhm.
while being logically consistent and repetitive of the underlying truth.
Yes.
It's a simple algorithm,
It's really simple. You just have to work. It's just
just time consuming
right. It's just
because
time,
you have to break them.
right? Because that's what you're doing. It's just exasperating. But you can't. The idea that you can't. I mean, this is military wisdom from Keegan, and he said, who I view as one of the great military.
Yes.
He said, you got to defeat an enemy on their terms, and the terms by which each civilization recognizes they've been defeated varies. So you can defeat the Middle Eastern person or group over and over again on Western terms, and they'll never recognize it as defeat. Right. Whereas we don't do that. And we don't even realize why we recognize defeat as the point at which we move into reconciliation. The question is, why do Europeans do that? Because it's just as fucking weird as everything else we do. We move to reconciliation to restore the benefit. We recognize conflicts will happen, that those conflicts can be conducted between the political powers without.
This is awful.
Well,
now you've upset me a little bit. There you found one of my remaining sacred cows.
what?
This means that you have to demonstrate that there is no reconciliation forthcoming ever.
Correct.
Well, shit, that's awful.
No, that's how you deal with Islam. That's the only way, and that's why China.
I understand.
There,
I understand.
You're systemically. What's the same thing with Judaism?
That's where I was going,
yeah.
And it's just awful.
No reconciliation is possible because your existence, the method by which you exist, is intrinsically evil to not only to your own people, but to the people around you, because it's just continued. Right? I can't believe I found a sacred cow of yours that actually bothered you.
That distressed me because it's like look, I'm a Western civilization guy, and I want reconciliation. I want to have the fisticuffs, and we can be friends after.
Exactly.
And it's like, okay, that means okay, that is about as awful as it gets.
Okay, so let's run with it.
Oh
no, this is good. This is a great line of thinking because I don't think we touched on this before in any.
No, it's awful.
So men reconcile Do women reconcile?
No,
They don't. They have the chicken hen philosophy, which is they destroy the enemy completely. They never forgive them, right?
ever.
Is Semitism a masculine or feminine group evolution?
Right, right.
They never forgive the enemy until they destroy them completely.
Wait, and so it goes to the 20th century and wars of destruction, which is unconditional surrender, which is not the Western way.
Correct. It's reconciliation. So who drove that? The French, the feminine, and the Jews, the feminine. But that's not who drove. The original attempt with Germany both times was reconciliation, and what you and I are advocating with Russia is reconciliation. But what do the liberals want? They want the destruction of Russia. Why? Because Russia's also, right, a bulwark against liberalism. I can't. I've actually got an emotional reaction out of you for the first time in my memory.
It's awful. It's awful because it's like, I understand. I don't have to like it though. And I have no argument to the contrary, right? Which is to say, it's not about my emotional consistency, sir. It's about my logical and irrational consistency.
No, I agree, but I mean, now I feel like I like, okay, you know what I feel like when I have like 15 times as many of those feelings as you do.
Well, I don't know what that means. What does that mean?
Oh, I have the women thing and the, and
Oh, I guess it's just it's like, oh, it's like we got punched or something. It's not good.
not good because you can't the only way you handle the Semitic method of warfare, because they're external, is you build a fucking wall like China did, and you keep them on the other side of it. It's either that or you have to make them go away, or you have to destroy their religion. That's the sequence: destroy their religion or make them go away. Now you can do what they do to us, which is occupy, undermine, but we don't. That's not European. We want to solve a problem and then move on to being productive. So we can't frame ourselves into the position. And colonization has been disastrous for us. Right? It's true. It might be true. It seems to be that Islam is a better religion for people whose half of the population is under 85 IQ. It might be the case.
Wait, it may be that it will end up that way if you allow it in your proximity.
Well, that's why you have to build a wall. It's not a, when you want to say it's genetic, well, you can say, well, it's genetic below 100 IQ, but it's cultural above 100 IQ. In other words, about 100, at least 110. So, it's like, I have followers here from all over the Muslim world, right? And they're some of my favorite people because they're men. So, unapologetically male. Now they're also unapologetically anti-religion, right?
Mm.
So I fucking love these guys, right? And so it's not a genetic problem for those people who have the IQ for Western civilization and have
Right.
the personality for it. But it is if you need to keep that familial structure, that low trust family structure, because you can't compete in Western civilization, which is what's happened. We see they don't integrate. That's not really true. They say they don't they integrate, but it's only the people that I'm talking about that integrate. The other people don't integrate. They just maintain their sub 100 IQ communities, and they become insular, and they try to defend their community against cultural legal integration that protects them. They're trying to create quarters. Well, I mean, I'm okay with quarters as long as we say, great, you're in this quarter, you can't vote, you don't get any subsidies. I mean, that's not. We've been doing that. Europeans have been doing that for thousands of years. So
Our tradition. That's how we resolve. That's how the Romans resolved the problem.
You put people in quarters. Now, people think the Jews were put in quarters, but they weren't. They asked for them. And the reason they asked for them is so that they could maintain their cultural without pollution from Europeans, which is how their incredible in-group pressure is how they maintain this group. And then their need to find out groups that they can parasitically extract from by their rather unpleasant means of irreciprocity. They have to go find places in the world where they can be small enough to get away with their behavior, but not large enough to be ostracized or exported or killed. Preyed upon, ostracized, exported, or killed.
I like that, turning it into a series. That was nice.
We gotta stay on message here. So yeah, I mean, you picked up on a good piece there. Anyway, I was trying to get back to we're using a very disciplined method of via negativa to identify the behavior of individuals by their in a way that is extraordinarily diagnostic of their truth, of their actual designs, even if those designs are normative, habitual, intuitionistic.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't make any difference.
But it's this is interesting because it's a via negativa analysis of behaviors in a social setting that detects irreciprocity and then outlaws it.
Yes.
And it doesn't, so it is, we're going back to this no reconciliation possible. It's absolute abolishment of irreciprocal behavior in the public sphere.
Right, and the problem is that immatures, who was pushing us? Oh, Luke was pushing us to say it's immaturity. It's just that feminine immaturity is more visible at present. This is the problem is the immature mind continues to tries to continue to maintain the irreciprocal relation between parents and child with the individual and society. And therefore we try to avoid responsibility by maintaining infantile dependence or undeveloped dependence. Now we're in a period where women have greater freedom to do that because we forgot to plug holes in it. And we're in and they've had the integration of Jewish thought, which has turned out to be the intellectual leadership of women.
Justify that behavior.
It justifies that behavior. And they did it by actually using African Americans as the guilt with which to cause females their sense of protection, which caused females to ally with them against the males and the Western civilization's male history, which is the maximization of individual responsibility, which is how we redirect the male status seeking to the production of commons instead of individual or familial achievement. It's really important. You can't just get there by hook or crook. You have to get wealthy by the production of commons. Does that make sense?
It amplifies the efforts of everybody.
Right. And so it creates this, we've accidentally or purposely, just because of one decision in our 5,000 years ago, we've accidentally preserved that one cultural property, which has led to all these wonderful virtuous cycles of evolutionary velocity which is interesting because we defeat other cultures by fucking commons. Isn't that fucking hysterical? We defeat them by producing high trust commons. It's just odd, I mean, who would do that? It requires extraordinary trust. You only find that like in insects, right? I mean, the difference is insects can't choose and we can. So the fact that we can do it at this enormous scale, despite being super predators who can choose to do otherwise, it's insane. It's brilliant. I don't know. It's why nobody else did it. It's freaking difficult. Trust is.
I'm going back to this. So I'm going back to what my patient told me about being Calvinist and there is no free will. There's just bots. And it's like, okay, I don't know if preordained is a fair terminology, but it is like it is the only, it was inevitable just by the math of the situation, the physics of it.
Yeah, whenever I hear something along those lines, I hear Weber. And so I have, the problem is when I hear what you're saying I'm unconsciously hearing it through that lens. So I'm not actually sure what you're saying. When you say you're just a bot, I don't get that.
You're running programs, it's calculable. You're calculating and you end up with a calculable result. And it is predictable.
Yeah, but does that bot means it's involuntary? Or do you mean
as a bot, it doesn't look involuntary to you, okay? But in the aggregate sense, it's predetermined. The outcome of this aggregation behavior given the circumstance.
so how do the Calvinists vary from everybody else? Because I saw Calvinism as a reassertion of individual responsibility that had been usurped by the church and put back into the German, under German culture. So what am I missing?
I am no expert on this philosophy or the dogma or whatever you want to call it. And it is the issue in my mind is the issue is the religious lady was objecting to what I had been saying to her because she objects to Calvinism and the bot-like nature of human beings because she doesn't want there to be no free will. And it's like, it's the illusion of free will more than free will that is actually occurring, in my opinion. Just like the illusion of consciousness.
Yeah, I don't know. Free will is taken out of context. Free will simply means, do I have the ability to choose between good and bad? And if I am a good person, I will discipline myself to choose the good, even if the opportunity presents the bad. And therefore, the individual can be held accountable for his actions. That's all free will meant. That's all it ever meant. Never meant anything more than that. I don't know where people have got this from.
Well, it goes to then, it's like this. So it's like this. It's a judicial term. And it is the justification for why we get to punish you when you're bad.
That's exactly what it is.
And that's all.
That's all it is. It's the Christian. It's actually a judicial term brought into philosophy, and it's compatible with Christian theology. That because it's essentially a metaphysical claim or a religious claim. You're not, it goes along with God grants you free will to make the right and wrong choices, right?
Okay.
So it doesn't mean what?
Because it's like this. It's like so you can have free will, and it will tell us how you choose. Will tell us whether or not we're going to exterminate you from our polity.
Where you're going to get into heaven? What's the difference? It's the same fucking thing. It's just a metaphor for the same thing. Heaven, right? Remember, the reason you choose religion as your means of argument is to avoid direct accusation in a direct accusation or direct coercion in a heterogeneous polity that's tribal and dominated by conflict. That's the reason you use religious speech, is conflict evasion, right? But so you always speak in parables,
right?
Because then everything's God's choice. It's not mine. Everything's God's will. It's not mine or ours. All right, and so you're advising this person on their benefit with religious language, instead of saying that's wrong, or I'm not going to put up with that, right? Or we're going to ostracize you for it.
Someone
That's
like me
the
is gonna punish you.
Well, I mean, but it's just once you realize that's all it is.
Yeah.
That's all language is. It's indirection, right? So you can avoid, you can negotiate or persuade or
Influence.
influence without saying I'm trying to dominate you, which is a no go in the Middle East, right? Right. So, which is what Islam is. It's the complete externalization of dominance expression, except, right? I mean, you're not even responsible. God will, right? There's God's why? It's because it creates non-conflict, right? It produces a race to the bottom by doing so. And that's only because Islam is not adaptable, right? It's, it's not, in other words, it claims it's concrete. But I mean, once you realize what they're doing and why, which is an environment, it's a practical solution to the problem of conflict and heterogeneous polity at the intersection of 4 continents and 4 races. Okay, that's exactly what it is. The problem is, when you try to take it outside of that context of the high trust Europeans, we cut everything out except Jesus says love each other so we can even make our trust better. So I mean, it's all that's going on. Right. And so we've sort of laundered, once we finish laundering Christianity of all this basically conflict avoidance, right? What we get is mindfulness and trust encouragement instead of conflict avoidance. Whereas they trust by conflict avoidance. We actually don't. We push up, and this is the weakness of Christianity, is that it's a European thing. You can't pretend that you can make other people into Christians, because Christianity is just one part of the triangle. Law, military, whatever. So you can't make it work. That's why people can't integrate. And it requires trust. Trust requires relative homogeneity. Relative homogeneity includes Christianity, because just like the natural law maximizes individual responsibility for everything, what does Christianity do? It maximizes your responsibility for social interactions so that you're maximizing the production of trust. It's incredibly credible responsibility. Now, what it does on the other hand is, well, if you're this Christian, you're doing all this social stuff, you're not responsible for all this political stuff. In other words, you don't have to worry about the putting up a fortress wall to keep the Muslims and Jews and whatever.
Oh.
Right. So it's not nationalist. That's why I'm always in favor of orthodoxy over Catholicism, because orthodoxy is nationalist. It says, well, Christianity ends at our border. Our Christianity ends at our border. So it doesn't make the mistake. I think I just covered some really important points there.
It was quite important.
Not really sure it came across, but
I thought it did. So that's the weakness of the Catholic system.
Is it's attempting to be a universal. It's like the Jews are trying to do Islam. That's the problem with those fucking religions. They're not religions. They're political systems. Why? Because the Middle East used it as its first foundation, and therefore it's a political system. Whereas the West used law as the first foundation, military technically, and law after that. And then the state evolved out of the law, and then the religion was an afterthought that helped us get along, right? And so, and which we were polytheistic, so that your religion could vary from my religion, could vary from mine. It was actually a very good system. But Christianity comes along, like Islam. It's basically a religion of conquest, which we have used as a religion of conquest. This is what a lot of historians say. The reason Christianity worked is it legitimized the Aryan desire for conquest under new terms. In other words, Aryans could feign that they were virtuous and moral by Christian conquest instead of just saying they were greedy fuckers.
Conquistadors.
That's really, and it's like, people are so poorly educated today that they don't know that this is, we know this for fucking decades, centuries. Just been, Christianity's an excuse for world domination by claiming we're virtuous instead of just conquerors. I mean, it's Alexander or Rome. Alexander for as partly as retaliation, but largely for self-aggrandizement and wealth. Rome for creating defensive order around them, which is turned into offensive order, and the Europeans for exploitation, economic conquest and exploitation, using Christianity as the excuse, right? They're trying to civilize people. Now, the truth is Christianity is pretty goddamn civilizing. If you look at any religion you want to have at any mass scale, you want to have Christianity. I mean, it's the optimum. Why? Because it's been Germanized into basically a supernatural justification for natural law. Okay. The world isn't the world fascinating? If you understand, it's actually fascinating. But it is also relatively simple, right? We just want to get stuff.
Right.
It's hard to organize people to get stuff. Right? I feel like huh?
Say that again.
I feel like I threw you off there.
No. It's a funny thing. It is. We just want to get stuff. It's like, so it reminds me of what my nephew told me one time. He's a programmer. He's like, I just want to get as much money as I can for doing as little work as possible. And I said, that makes you special. Exactly how, sir? Exactly. That's what we're all up to, brother.
I studied computer science is just my hobby, AI hobby, right? And that's really what it is. It's my robot, android, artificial intelligence,
right?
Hobby, right? And I always thought I would just run businesses, right? But what happened in my generation was that you could make money taking over companies with technology, right? And so, computerizing industries, which was incredibly Jesus Christ, was catching money, right? Even today, I mean, I was talking to somebody in LA the other day what the salaries these people are getting, and it's like, that's fucking insane. LA, San Francisco, they're higher than Seattle salaries.
Now, I got a book here that I have. It's called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, which it relates to the AI, and I look forward to reading it because I think this is we're at this peculiar stage where the efficiency of the businesses was increased by the computers, but now there's a parasitic function to suck information out of all the individuals in the civilization and control them and profit by that mechanism, which I regard as unethical. And that is what we're in, this juvenile stage of acquisitionism using those machines.
Well, you got to think of it as a rolling problem, right? So the rolling problem, we go back and further in history, with the obvious one is the industrial revolution comes on, takes people off the farm and puts them in labor where they're way more productive per capita, right? And so the prices of goods go down. But then that creates a demand for the clerical workers to administer all this. So we increase that. They become way more productive as a component of the laborers, because that's what they do, right? They organize.
Right.
Clerical workers organize the shit that gets in the hands of the laborers, right? So they can be coordinated around the world. Then you get into the specialists, and then you get into the science. Right? This is really great. It's really great until the thing you're inventing is machines that automate the labor out of the workforce, and then you get to the machines that are driving the clerical workers out of the workforce. And right now we're on the border of driving the knowledge workers out of the workforce. Right? So, it's just like it's like, so what do we do with these people? And what they're doing is they're dropping into service jobs that have very low multipliers compared to labor. Like a labor thing, right? You might get a bunch of people together and combine some material resources, and the thing has a durable intertemporal value. But what's the intertemporal value of your waitress? There isn't any. It's actually an ongoing cost. So what's happening is this shift. And so what you described, how did you describe it? Anyway, what you're describing is a continuation of this process. And so this is so Musk's argument, which is probably true, is that we have a tremendous labor shortage in America, right? And we do. But he's not answering the other half of the question. We have and so what's happening is these machines will replace the labor shortage, right? That's great. And in other words, help us. They'll help us solve the labor shortage, and so our plenty and our will go up, but our costs will go down. That's true. But why is there a labor shortage? Because it's pretty hard to program a machine, right? It's pretty hard to organize a production line. And so what's happening is we're actually dropping people out of, which you can see in the workforce participation numbers. We're dropping people out of the workforce because they can actually, things are so cheap now, but relatively, that you can live on if you're a guy, especially a single, you can live on very little and enjoy life dramatically by wearing a t-shirt, a couple of t-shirts, jeans, and hoodies, a computer video game, and going out partying with your friends. And so what's your cost of that? It's trivial. We could actually reduce it more profoundly if we fix the housing problem, which is easy to fix too. So I mean, what happens to all these guys that are playing video games and all these chicks that are whoring?
Oh my!
It's like, I don't know.
They're not reproducing.
Well, they're not reproducing, but that might not be a problem if they're the same people who can't participate in the workforce the remaining workforce that So
I understand you.
So and I'm not in the idea that we need more population, not on Peterson's on this bullshit, is nonsense. The truth is, you only need more population if you're driven by consumption. Instead of production. Consumption just stops anything you make right here with you.
Right.
But production moves the whole society forward. So I don't know, a lot of ways this could go. Usually it goes badly. Anyway.
That's it. It reminds me of, it's beginning to look a lot like a dark age.
Yeah.
I don't want, and it's like, that's not a good sign.
Well, the other thing the left doesn't want to hear is that the eugenics problem was the only way to prevent it. The eugenics solution was the only way to prevent it. Because what happens in history is it's the Peter principle. The Peter principle is everybody rises to a level of competence. What happens is you make the society wealthy enough that people are raised to the point of incompetence where they become dissatisfied because there's no higher level of incompetence they can achieve.
So you hit it.
That's what inequality results from. Inequality results from the inability of people to raise to the next level of competency because even the level of competency they have is already their level of incompetence.
They've already exceeded it.
And so what happens then is you get into what we're in the places, which is you get financialism to try to preserve this illusion. And so that's what has to deflate. And so what happens is what you call dark ages or people call collapse or whatever is basically the problem of raising a bunch of people out of poverty, right, into their level of incompetence and getting used to that pattern of consumption and growth when it's actually no longer sustainable because the advantage that lifted you out has been exhausted. So, and it's been exhausted because you've demanded redistributions and rents sufficiently that you can't adapt. You can't, because you're no longer investing in the future.
You're at your Peter Principle position.
Right. And your Peter Principle is leading to consumption and debt in order to maintain the state rather than what got you there in the first place, which was in research and development and future advantage. So that's why research and development is so powerful, and why abandoning it is so bad, and why knowing the difference between what's academic jerking off and what's fundamental research that is going to result in greater transformation of energy is valuable. All right. So I mean, the people, you just gave an example of how people tend to think of one variable without realizing the opposing variables, right? And so you have this problem of population competency, which is IQ, malinvestment because of this size of the underclass the lower class has been raised up, debt in order to maintain it, the expansion of debt and the effective redistribution suppress intercapital capitalization, driving down need for more current returns. And so you get less long-term investment, which requires increasingly higher levels of capital investment in order to retain an extraction, because that's where Popper was wrong. The way you tell something can be researched is the amount of cost it is to obtain the next level of transformation of energy at the current scale you're at. That was probably too deep for people, but anyway.
No, they can listen to it again. It's not that deep.
So
that was good, though. The interesting function. So it comes down to me is refining the demands necessary to accomplish the objective of continuing the project into the future, given the current state of affairs.
Well, I mean, we have to redirect capital allocation, which is what I'd say, right? Now the average person says, those financial guys are stealing from us. Those government guys are stealing from us. They're spending our money on this. They're getting up. Well, they're right. The problem is, what do they want that money spent on?
It doesn't matter.
Right. Well,
the only thing that matters is it's a waitress problem, which is immediate consumption, right? You're going to satisfy the demand for immediate consumption to get the sufficient support to cause the changes to the substantial changes in the system that are necessary to avoid the dark age.
Right, and that includes instead of spending money on people who are unfit or unwilling to be fit, so that instead of spending money, which is a collapse, right? It's a failure. It's a hole in the water. And into longer reproduction cycles. In other words, deeper research and higher returns. Now, we produce an awful lot of money that can be put to that. Now, you'll do that, and the poor will activate the clerisy, so liberals, to say, we want that money. Like they said, well, we shouldn't go into space, you should give us that money. As if the amount of money spent on the space program would make any difference, right? Look how much we've thrown at it. It was a great piece this morning. Look how much money we've thrown at education. It makes no fucking difference. Doesn't make any difference at all.
Yeah, well, it's certainly not better. I would make the argument that it is different and it's worse. It's woke. Jesus. Oh my.
Are women incapable of teaching? After age 7, yes. Maybe 8. I know how it felt in 5th grade to finally get a male teacher, and it was like a pressure came off my chest because everything was clear all of a sudden. Order was created in the world.
Oh my, like I say, just okay. I have no comment. I
had a really great geometry teacher, that's true. Female geometry teacher. But very German, very disciplined. She has passed, or I would go visit her and thank her for all she did for me.
Right.
And if you look at my male versus female teachers, there's no fucking comparison. It's like the speed of light versus walking. That's true after fourth grade. So around that 7 to 9, please. Which is what the Greeks said. Some poor woman, single mom, raising 3 boys, asked me a question of how to raise men.
Hmm.
And I said, well, there's no substitute. Here's why. Because a man's just a man by his nature. A woman's a woman by her nature. And it's actually the conflict and reconciliation between them. And the ability for you to understand how the role of men and women, that teaches men and women, that teaches boys how to be men. Right? 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 And because, and it's also the same thing with children. We know that having 4 children, 2 of which are boys and 2 of which are girls, is the optimum family, because everybody has somebody else to learn from. So a boy has a boy and 2 girls. A girl has a girl and 2 boys, and that's why you get training without having to have training. In other words, you have an environmental productivity as long as you're teaching people how to work together, love, work together, and conflict resolution. And usually things we call chores, but responsibilities. Right? If you do that stuff, it's usually pretty easy. The rest of it's just socialization and playing sports and repetitious learning nobody wants to do. And so I said, well, I might talk to Noah. And of course, I want to talk to Noah about this because it kind of bothered me a little bit. Is that telling a single mother the only solution is no use? I said, the problem you need to tell a single mother is how to solve the problem of boys despite being a woman. Right? And there seems to be nothing out there for how to raise boys who will become husbands to women, right, that you would want as your husband. Right? There's no...
And when you have demonstrated your lack of interest.
Well, I mean, but that's like saying that men who went to war and died and left behind a mother and her sons.
Right.
Doesn't matter. They still have the same problem. So it's actually fairly easy to teach women how simple boys are. Right? It doesn't take much. They ain't like you. This is how they work, and this is what to do. Right? And it's basically, who said it? It's basically, mom is a lifeguard and dad is a cheerleader, which means mommy's trying to make sure you don't get hurt, and dad's trying to make sure you take risks. Right? And boys need to take risks, and they need to congratulate when they succeed, but they need to be made heroes when they fail, if they try. Right? It's heroic.
Right.
There's basically 10 of those rules, and we need to produce those 10 rules for women.
That'll be good.
Right? And I want to
That's
work
our next project.
I want to work with him on that because he's so successful at teaching fatherhood. And he's successful at teaching motherhood with fatherhood, right? But we need a way to get single moms to understand the 10 commandments of raising boys.
There you go.
It's actually not hard. The hard one for women is that you can't let a boy feel like he has to protect you. Because it will make him a very dangerous person. Most dangerous people in history, men in history, have some part of that.
Right.
So the trick is, how do you, for a woman who is emotional, fearful, and under duress as a mother, do not treat your son as a substitute husband. All right? Do not make him pay that burden, because you're ruining him for life. Now, I've had this. I've seen this with single mothers that I've dated. you're putting too much burden on a boy, right? But what you want to do is give him a burden he obtains inspiration from, rather than
Obligation.
not only it's fear, than fear of satisfaction, right? Because I know where my own psychology is based on this. My father was abusive to my mother. I feel like I'm responsible for everything. I got to protect. So this is part of my core, my foundation, so I'm aware of it. But it's what's one of the things that's really obvious. You look at all the men in history who become fucking dangerous, like Hitler or Nietzsche or Alexander or Napoleon. Napoleon and Alexander are the best examples. You do not want a man, or the shooters that we have today. I mean, single mothers, like single mothers is the cause. Why? Because the boys are afraid and they want it to stop. And how do men handle things they're afraid of and want to stop? They kill them. Right? So you're creating a thing that is an animal that is, and you do that because you're letting your emotions spread onto your kids. This is why couples work better, because the man will provide the security that the woman the woman will provide the defense because of her fears. But in the absence of one another, the absence of the masculine, the boys become dangerous. The truth is, it doesn't look like there's any negative to the absence of a mother.
That was particularly rude.
Beyond the first 2 years, right? It doesn't look like there's any problem. You can take a boy out of a mother's hands at 7 to 9, and he's gonna be flawless. You could take a girl out of a mother's hands at, I don't know, 11 or 12, and she will be flawless. The problem is odd, because we all think of our mothers as primary whatever, but it's actually really only useful until we have the minimum amount of agency. And after that, mothering turns out to be infantilizing. One of the more important reasons to get people into social and employment functions earlier, and to have less school. Less school in the sense that we practice today. It's very odd. Is this in the category of stuff I don't want to know?
Yeah, this definitely falls into that kind of unpleasant category. I agree. But it has to do with errors of social constructive processes, which is like, that's a big wheel that's all messed up, and it's hard to straighten it out.
You look at all those boys who went to become, at age 7, they went to become apprentices, right? So you live and work with men. You're a man, 9. You had the girls who went to work at 5. So my favorite example is sewing book bindings. My grandmother was selling mittens by the side of lumberjacks when she was 5. Which I thought was, she was telling me the story of it. And he talks about it like you and I, like, grabbing a sandwich. It was just obvious. But she could knit a pair of wool mittens by the time she was 5, right? Flawlessly.
How about that?
We have fucking 23-year-olds that can't make fucking eggs.
Oh, I can't take it.
I don't want to even hint at somebody, but even hint at this, but I had a conversation with a millennial a bit ago. And this is a high-performing individual. Every accusation you would make of millennial thinking is ridiculous. This is a graduate from a top university who's doing okay. He's a whole generation of people who are crazy. They have absolutely no understanding of the world. For what it's like they're living in a fucking novel.
I know.
I'm gonna get.
I know. It's frightening.
No,
I won't even. I have a story to tell you, but I won't say it on this forum because it's no good. But I will tell you a story here later.
all right. So I feel like tempo is winding down, and I don't know if I would like to end this one, have that conversation, and we can decide if we'll create a session video and go on later if you want. All right?
That sounds good.
So let's wrap this one up. This is
Yeah.
Sunday, January 8th, 2023. Brad, you can see the like, subscribe thing.
Yeah. Hit like, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave a lot of comments, and check the website and donation.
All right.
This was episode 230105. Thanks for coming.
Love you, brother.